Thank you very much for coming down. Thanks to Brilliant Bookstore for organizing this. This is my first time in Taipei that I'm talking about my books. I've been to Taipei before, but the first time I'm talking about my work. So, I able to understand me? Is my English okay? You can understand. Okay. So a little bit about me. I was born in India. And then I moved to the United States for about a couple of years. Then I moved to Singapore, and I've been living in Singapore for the last 12 years now. And I have a day job, like every writer in Singapore. We have a day job because we need to pay the rentals. And so I worked as a consultant, management consultant. But I've been writing on and off, and so far I've managed to publish 3 books. All of them are related to travel, a bit of anthropology, a bit of art, and I also organize poetry competition, cultural events for migrant workers and refugees in Malaysia, in Singapore. I think some of the books are here from those competitions as well, so if you're interested, you can have a look at them. So today I'll talk from 2 of my latest books. So the first one is The Angels by the Milk River, which was launched last year. So yeah, that's the book that is passing around. It's a collection of travel stories from about 16 countries, and these stories are interactions with people you normally don't engage with when you're traveling. So they are, for example, homeless people in Mumbai, homeless people in Korea, in Seoul. They are Filipino women boxers, Filipino beauty pageants, so there are stories about them. There are stories about people working in the ship, in a container ship. That's the first story. And there are also stories about China's #1 soccer fan. So it's a mix of unusual characters, some planned interactions, some unplanned interactions, which were published in a few magazines, and then some of them were not published. So last year, one of the publishers in India, a left-wing publisher, independent publisher called Yoda Press, they came up with this collection last year. So a lot of these stories are from Southeast Asia, from Indonesia, from Philippines, from Malaysia and Singapore, but there are also stories from Latin America, like Brazil and Ecuador, as well as from India and China and Korea. So these are in the first book. My latest book is this big fat one called Sacred Love, Erotic Art in the Temples of Nepal. It's a photography collection of erotic art in the temples of Nepal, accompanied by an essay about why these art is there. So I'll spend about 15 minutes talking about that book as well, which is the most recent one which was launched. It's been published by Mandala and Adarsh Press. They are the biggest publishers in Nepal, and it's I think available in a few countries in Southeast Asia and India and Nepal as well. Yeah? So I will do a few readings, and then I will take a few questions and comments as we go along. How much time do I have?
2 hours.
We'll take a nap in between.
Later the Q&A.
Okay. So the first story that I want to read is, since you are at Brilliant and Bookstore, which is quite focused on Southeast Asia, so I want to read a story from Indonesia. It's less of a story and more of an essay, I would say, and it's about a place called Banjarmasin. Yeah? This city is known as the Venice of Southeast Asia. There's a lot of canals and river in the city, and there are houses which are built right on the canals and lakes. But it looks very different from Venice. Yeah? It's not beautiful at all. The water is very dirty, and it's all smelly. And the houses are inhabited by very poor people. Yeah? So it looks very different from Venice in that sense. Yeah? So there's a short story. I'll read from there. It's there in the book as well for those of you who have that in your hands. Yeah. So here it goes. The highs and lows from the canals of Banjarmasin. Perhaps Banjarmasin is an amphibian. On land, I found this South Kalimantan town like any other Indonesian town, with streaming motorcycles, markets overflowing with stuffed toys, and thousands of deep-fried snack carts continuing their millennial race. But once I ventured into one of the town's hundreds of canals, Banjarmasin revealed its true character. When the engines of my small boat began humming, it was like Basho's frog jumping into the ancient pond moment. "Foreigner, foreigner," a child screamed at the top of her voice. And this message got relayed from one house's backyard to the next like wildfire. What I had planned to be a 1 hour for 50,000 rupiah, that's about $5, 1 hour for 50,000 rupiah contract with my boatman turned into a greatest egotistical trip of my life. For never had I imagined I had such great capacity to bring happiness to others. The residents of the canal side houses came out in big groups. Bare naked children, bent back grandmothers, cool vibe oozing soccer teams, toned young males made of copper and beaming pregnant mothers. At my very sight, the children became ecstatic. The boys jumped from their backyards creating waves that folded the otherwise perfect reflection of houses on the canals. Kids dropped all around me, splashing water that drenched me wet. They swam as fast as they could to my boat, hoping to touch me just once, or even better, give me a high five. The strongest boys managed to climb onto my boat, and not knowing what to do afterwards, just gave me a smile and fell back into the water. The younger ones screamed out, shaking their head, closing their eyes in utter delight. The girls and the older people folded hands and greeted me with big smiles. There was no doubt what a wonderful person I am. I didn't know how to react. It was a sudden attack of innocence on my senses. I wanted to join in their ecstasy, somersault and dive into the murky water, and then scream around with those jovial children. But I had 1 hour 50,000 rupiah contract. So I just waved and waved. He waved at me, he waved at me. The neighborhood was in raptures. I almost felt that I could make the world a better place. Once things calmed down, I could finally marvel at the endless stream of houses sitting at the bank's canals, leisurely hanging their scrawny wooden legs in the water. Houses, mosques, madrasas, grocery shops, furniture stalls, all built with patches of wood, the same color as the canals, nailed to each other. Some of the houses had lost their footing and were slowly merging with the canals, looking like old men slowly crouching for a hot spring bath. Colorful coffins waited patiently in coffin workshops along the canal. Canals, canals, more canals. Some wide as a soccer field, pretending to be a river. Some narrow as a log of wood. They connected here and there, creating a maze, going about quietly with the business of moving all the dirty water from the washing of the Veracruz mountains, closely watched over by roaming patrols of hyacinths and water lilies. Here, morning began with the boatmen and boatwomen waking up the owners of the gasoline stalls by the canals, first by calling their name, then clapping, and then a friendly shove with the oars. Soon, Bhagwan's women came out from the backyards of each house and lathered their whole bodies and mouths sitting on the small jetties built from their house. For the women of Banjarmasin loved to shower and brush their teeth at the same time. The elderly men came out too, and hundreds of eager fish would splash out begging them for food in the fisheries built on the canals, because it was breakfast time in Banjarmasin. As the day progressed, the canals became the highways moving people in all directions. Tiny heads in white hijab going to school, ducking every time their boat passed under the bridge. An endless row of motorcycles with their helmets keep running on these bridges. From the boats below, they look like chess pawns on roller blades. The canal ferries of Banjarmasin, the colorful old women selling bananas, guavas, rice, and other supplies on canoes, rode from door to door looking for custom. Throughout the day, elderly women sat facing the canoe holding a fishing rod. And also throughout the day, 1,001 buckets tied with long strings, built to fetch water from the canals, swung from each backyard like a pendulum, keeping time in the canals of Banjarmasin. During noon, Banjarmasin is an oppressive piece of earth as the sun turns into a baker. I rushed indoors, inside my small room in a Sharia-compliant hotel, sitting, dozing, moist from the sweat, my arms feeling like enormous concrete blocks. Hour after hour of doing nothing, not a single movement in the dark, windowless room, trying to think, but soon losing every chain of thought. I was turning into a wet statue with a drooping head. I was decomposing in Banjarmasin. I was scared. I needed to make a move before the flies moved in from under the door. But I was in a state of trance. My elephant limbs refused to budge. I recall the high fives. The children must be waiting for me in the canals, their heads bobbing in and out of the murky water. I had to go. I had to stay alive. I concentrated. My head rose up slowly. The fingers moved. And in one huge effort, I left my damp grave. And soon I was on a boat on the canals of Banjarmasin. After another evening of boosting my ego, I rushed back to my hotel to retire early for the next day. I had an appointment to keep with my boatman at 5 in the morning. On my way, I realized that Banjarmasin had changed its streets. Jamu, 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 traditional male-powered drinks, had lined up neatly along an endless chain of small tables that had sprung up from nowhere. Where had all these shops been when I was there during the day? Jamu, jamu, jamu. This was serious business, and vendors were indeed looking dead serious. They set up small stools in front of their table stalls because at nights, Banjarmasin becomes an enormous winding serpent of jamu bars where patrons swarm in looking grim, focused, not exchanging a single word with anyone around, ordering a jamu drink with a gesture, then quietly finishing it in small sips, looking down all the time, their mojo building up slowly inside, and then with burning eyes, they hit the streets of Banjarmasin. And then I realized in this archetype conservative town, some windows and doors were lighting up and calling out to these jamu-filled men. One of such love hotels right in front of my Sharia hotel. That night, I dreamed that I was frolicking about amongst thousands of half-open durians, all a bright orange that I had only seen in Banjarmasin. It's 5 in the morning and it's very dark, but the motorcycles were still keeping the streets awake in Banjarmasin. I walked along the banks of one of the canals to meet my boatman. There were a few people walking about, dark silhouettes, a woman in sleepwear, certainly insane, holding up one arm to heaven, a man walking in helical steps, a stick in his hand, another man wearing a hat, peeing in bits here and there, marking territory. I tried to disappear into the night as well as I could, moving like only a black cat could. Then I came across a young woman who was perhaps wearing a tight jacket and jeans. She had obviously been standing for long, as she kept shifting weight from one leg to another. She whistled at me and said, "Come on, young man, let's play." I hurried my pace and my heart caught up. What harm could she do to me? But I was scared. She didn't walk after me, but kept talking. "Come on, darling." The mosque across the canal began speaking out too, and the synchronized muezzin's calls were drowning out her voice. I had almost escaped her when she called out, "It's cheap." The muezzin calls wouldn't stop. "Help me, I'm hungry," she screamed. That moment my heart sunk and I wept along the canals of Banjarmasin. Thank you, that was the Banjarmasin story.
这个东西是巨港的这个 the south big city in Sumatra.
In Kalimantan, in Borneo, yeah, in South Borneo.
Who knows the Chinese name of this city? Okay.
I don't know the Chinese. Yeah, it's in South Borneo, Kalimantan. Big city. Okay. Is my English okay? Are you able to understand? Follow? Okay. So what I'll do is I'll read another short story. It's a much longer story in the book, but I'll read just a short excerpt from this, which appeared in the Diplomat magazine. It's about punching or walking out of poverty, women boxers and beauty pageants in the Philippines. Is there a name for Banjarmasin? So this story is about the Filipino women boxers and beauty pageants. Yeah. So here it goes. Punching or walking a way out of poverty, the women boxers and pageants in the Philippines. While the Philippines has been at the forefront of men's boxing, with stalwarts like Pancho Villa and Manny Pacquiao, the female boxers have attracted little attention, despite their growing list of achievements. Josie Gabuco won gold at AIBA, Women's World Boxing Championships in 2012. Neshi Petesio is ranked second worldwide in 57 kilo category. Gretchen Abaniel is WIBA World Champion. I visited the camp in Baguio, in Philippines, for the Amateur Boxing Association of the Philippines. There at the humble living quarters like backpacker dormitories, 13 junior and senior women were undergoing training. Head coach Patricio Gaspi says, "Our girls are mostly from Mindanao and Visayas, the poorest parts of the Philippines. Here they get some stipend, a little small money, free boarding and lodging. If they win, the government rewards them more than ₱1 million if it's in the Olympics." That's about $20,000. Million peso is about $20,000. More than ₱1 million if it's in the Olympics. Our sponsors also come in. They can also get a government job like in the police. While that may not compare with Manny Pacquiao or Nonito Donaire's income, it does help Josie Gabuco, whose father had been a tricycle driver, and Nesty Petesio, whose parents are both unemployed. The stories echo those of Michelle Martinez, a retired boxer from the pioneer generation of female women boxers, and currently a coach at ABAP Philippines. Boxing helped Michelle become the sole breadwinner in her family, with 7 siblings, allowing her to open a small eatery for her parents and finance her siblings' education. But the career choice has a price. Josie has an 8-year-old son, whom she meets only rarely, having to spend most of her time at the camp or traveling for competitions. She says, "Earlier my son cried and screamed when he saw me fight. 'Please don't beat my mother. Please don't beat her.' But now he understands why mommy has to do this. Josie doesn't want her son to become a boxer. 'No way,' she says. 'It's too tough on the body.' Michelle says, few women are allowed by their parents to take up boxing. They see professional boxing and fear that their daughters' faces will end up with scars. But amateur boxing is much safer. We fight with headgear. I watch the boxers train, like a bunch of lean and petite soldiers let loose with disco music, attacking punching bags and coaches, 1,000 explosions, swift footwork, relentless ferocity. Filipino boxers are well known for their aggressive style. Patricio says, coaching a female boxer is different. We can beat up the men if they don't train hard, but with the girls, I can't do that. It sounds anachronistic, but this is, after all, a sport about beating up people. I asked the boxers if they could someday become a politician like Manny Pacquiao. Nesh says, "No way, sir. Even at my hometown, hardly anyone recognizes me." I asked what makes a good boxer. Patricio says, "It's the mind and it's the heart. Whether it's a male or female, it's always the same. She has to think smart and think fast. And she can have the best technique, but without the heart, the guts, she can't go anywhere." Roel Velasco, the women's head coach, says, "That's why I will train any girl who wants to learn. Even if she is thin, if she trains hard and has the heart, she can beat the best." Neshti confirms, "Life here is tough. I need to train harder and harder. But without boxing, I would be nothing." Apart from boxing, the other great Filipino obsession is beauty pageants. The country hosts over 300,000 beauty pageant contests every year, in every imaginable category. There are pageants for men, juniors, seniors, disabled people, LGBTs, pregnant women, prisoners, women weighing above 80 kilograms, Muslims, and even vegetarians. Rags to riches stories abound. Venus Raj, Miss Universe Philippines 2010, was raised in a Naipa hut without electricity. Janicel Lubina, Miss Philippines International 2015, was a domestic helper, just like her mother. Every year, millions of Filipinos weep in front of their TV listening to such stories. I met up with Makoy Manlapaz, who formed Goldian, a pageant grooming agency, along with Mario Bargantinos and Paui Ventura. The agency trains contestants in pasarela, catwalk, posing, dance, etiquette, confidence building, and for question and answer sessions. They only work with girls from poor families. Pageant contests are the great equalizer, says McCoy. Earlier pageants were only from well-off families with fair skin. But today, they like the ones with darker skin, so they are mostly from poor households, often from the provinces. I joined him to observe a photo shoot for Divine Ezra, who McCoy is grooming for the World Beauty Queen Contest 2015. Along with his ground designer Alan Lacerna, swimsuit designer Dave Zamora, and photographer Marian Celis. Divine is tall for a Filipina and quite dark. Rogel Flores of Kandangan Flores, another grooming agency, had told the Filipino Daily Enquirer that he never rejected any aspirant unless she was below 5 feet 5 inches. A philosophy almost akin to boxing coach Roel Velasco's, except for the height requirement. Engrossed in grooming Divine, the boys seemed like children playing with Barbie doll, dressing her, combing her hair, moving around her limbs for the perfect pose. Later they would tell me they're all gays. "We're all doing this out of our passion," says McCoy. "We don't receive any money. All of us have day jobs anyway. As a boy, I was awestruck watching pageants on TV, beautifully dressed, worshipped like princesses. I wanted to be one of them, but I couldn't, so I became a coach." In many countries, pageant contests have declined into irrelevance, feminist opposition being a reason. Although there are feminist arguments both for and against pageants, objectification versus empowerment, arguments also used for and against women's boxing, professional boxing, and MMA for the occasional creation of sexual imagery around female fighters. McCoy tells me, in Philippines, there were never any feminist opposition. Pageants are seen as role models, often heroically saving their families from poverty. But sometimes they are criticized by the religious morality brigade for occasional illicit affairs between pageants and politicians or businessmen. Out there with the boys and Divine, I only see her as an athlete preparing to win a contest, training intensely, eating right, and just like the boxers, preparing the mind for quick thinking, developing the heart for confidence under spotlights. But unlike boxers, pageants have to perfect their walk. That's the most challenging part of their grooming. Thank you. That was a small excerpt from the beauty pageants and female boxers in the Philippines. So the last stretch that I'll talk about is this latest book that I had. This is about the erotic art in the temples of Nepal. Maybe you can pass it around one more time so some of you can get an idea of how some of the pictures look like. So feel free to flip around and see some of the pictures around this art. So I'll give you a brief explanation of these pictures and why of this art and why they are there in Nepal. So has anyone of you been to Nepal? Oh, you've been to Nepal. Have you seen those erotic art in the temples? Yeah. Okay, you've seen them. Do you know a lot about them?
No, I just
Okay.
been for the
Okay. So when I went to Nepal for the first time as well, I was I was familiar with erotic art and erotic sculptures because in India many temples have erotic carvings as well. But in Nepal they look very crude. They are not done in a masterful way as the sculptures or carvings in India are done. Yeah. So they are almost a bit funny and a bit humorous in some sense, a bit shocking as well because you have lesbian, gay kind of themes. You have animals with men, men with animals. You have orgies. You have threesome, foursome, fivesome. You have animals on animals. You have spirits on animals. So you have all types of erotic imagery in these temples. Yeah. So that led to an interest, and I went around photographing some of these temples for about 2 years. Not 2 years at a stretch, but I visited about 6 times. So I photographed them. And then I also interviewed people on the streets, common people. I interviewed sociologists. I interviewed Maoists who were fighting against the government at that time. And I also interviewed architects and artists who actually make these sculptures. Yeah? So a little bit about these carvings. They are only found in the Kathmandu Valley. Yeah? Nepal is a very diverse country. You have the very high mountains and then you have the flat plains and jungles in the south. So these are the people who live in the Kathmandu Valley. Yeah? And they are a special kind of people called the Newar people. And very interestingly, their origin is from the southern part of India. There's also a tribe in Kerala in South India called Nayar. And they are the same group of people who migrated apparently from south of India all the way to Nepal about 3,000 kilometers away, yeah, long back in history. And even today the temples are sort of similar. They have the pagoda style of design. Yeah? So the Newaris, they follow a mix of Buddhism and Hinduism. It's a mixture religion, and their version of Hinduism is very different from the mainstream versions of Hinduism today. Yeah? So their version is much more tantric. Tantric Hinduism is very complex. Some people think it's a bit more frivolous, a bit less serious, but some people think that it's actually very deep. Yeah, and it's a very confusing ideology as such. So they follow these mixture of religion, Buddhism and Hinduism, and some of their practices and traditions are very unique among Hindus and Buddhists. Yeah? Just to give you one example, their women are married 3 times in their lives. Yeah? So the first wedding happens when they are about reaching 8 years of age. Yeah? And at that age of 8 years, they are married to this fruit called stone apple. I don't know what you call in Chinese. It's a hard fruit like this big. Outside is very hard and inside is like soft pulp, yeah, orange color. We call it bell in our languages. So this stone apple, it can stay for a long time. If you don't break it, it can stay for a long time. So that's why they get married for the first time to this stone apple, because eventually if a man can cheat on the wife, but the stone apple will never cheat on the wife. Yeah? So that's why they are always married first to the stone apple. The second wedding happens when she reaches puberty, around the age of 12 or 13. During that time, the girl is locked up in the house with no doors and windows for about 2 weeks. Yeah, so for 2 weeks she doesn't go out of the house. She cannot open the doors and windows, and she cannot see the sun. And she cannot also see any male. Yeah, during those 2 weeks she can't see any man. That's why only the girls of the house, they bring food to her and take care of her if there is any need. They can watch TV though. They can watch men on television. It's okay. According to a religious sermon, they were allowed to watch television. So after 14 days, the windows and doors are opened in the morning, and she comes out of the house, sees the sun the first thing, and then she is married to the sun, and the sun is supposed to protect her for the rest of her life. And the third wedding is a normal wedding. She marries a human being whenever that age comes. Yeah. So they have these interesting traditions that are there. And the Nevaris, they claim that they were the first to build the temples in the style of pagodas. Yeah. So Chinese people claim that pagoda style came from China. Indians claim the pagoda design came from India. But Nevaris, they have a justifiable claim that the pagoda temples design came from Nepal and not from any other place. Yeah? No one knows for sure that yet. So in Nepal, in this Kathmandu Valley, most of the Hindu temples are in this design of pagoda structure. Yeah? So there are groups one on top of another, always in odd numbers. And then all these are made of wood. Yeah? In Nepal, they don't have stones, they make it out of wood. And these roofs are supported by pillars, yeah? Small pillars which hold the roof to the wall. Yeah? So these erotic carvings appear at the bottom of these pillars which support the roof. Yeah? And only in the first story, the carvings have these small erotic carvings in that place. Yeah? So one of the questions that always comes in mind is why are these erotic carvings there, and what is the reason for having them? So if you go to a tour guide, they will always say it's because the goddess of virgin, the goddess of lightning, is a virgin goddess, yeah, and she is very shy. So if you have these carvings in these temples, she will be shy to strike the temple. Yeah. So this is a way to protect the temples from lightning, because the goddess of lightning is a virgin and she is shy of these kind of carvings. But most experts say this is not a correct theory. Yeah? But they don't know as yet what is the main reason. There are more than 11 reasons I could find why these carvings are there, and I have them in the book. Some of them are they wanted to protect these temples from Muslims when the Muslims were attacking. And again, Muslims would be surprised and shocked by these pictures of men having sex with animals and all that. So they thought that if you have these images, the Muslims won't destroy the temples. But there's also a theory that Hinduism was losing ground to Buddhism at that time, and to make Hinduism look more cool and more charming, they were having these carvings in the temples. But another reason, and most likely reason, is that they are tantric symbols. Yeah, they don't really mean what they are showing on the face of it, because tantric Hinduism, it has a lot of emphasis on sex or abandonment of sex, both sides. Yeah? You can either have no sex at all in your life, or you have a sex with the purpose of reaching a certain level of consciousness. Yeah? So these could actually be hidden tantric symbols, as some of the experts have said. Yeah? Now, many of these carvings, as I was saying, they have a lot of these shocking elements given the society's context. So the Nepalese society is a very conservative society even today, even though it's the most liberal in South Asia. Yeah? So gay marriage, for example, is recognized in Nepal, and among all the countries in South Asia, only Nepal has recognized them. But still, most of the people are quite conservative in their attitudes towards sex. So these stories these carvings definitely become as a bit of a shock to the locals as well, who think that this is not part of their day-to-day life, and this is something that the ancients had done for some reasons which they cannot understand. Now, I also talked a lot to the artists who make these carvings, yeah, because usually, like in China as well, the artists were never recognized when they built these beautiful temples, because Nepalese temples, they are a UNESCO heritage for their carvings. So all these craftsmen are highly skilled, but their names are never written in the temple. They are not recognized. So I went to them, I talked to them to understand more, and they were telling me that all these art is passed down from one generation to other, and there's no formal school to learn wood carving the Nepalese way. So the best carvers now in Nepal, Indra Kaji Shilpakar and IP Shilpakar, his son, I met them when I was in Nepal. They both studied contemporary carving, contemporary arts, but they then learned from their grandfathers and fathers on how to do Nepalese style of wood carving. So they were telling me that one of the reasons why the erotic carving doesn't look as nice as the other carvings in the temple is because the master never does the carving for erotic art. It's the juniors, the younger artists who always do the erotic art. And the masters only do the gods and goddesses which are there in the temples. Yeah? So that's his reason of why the art was not as refined in Nepal as in India, where it's more of a decorative element. Now, one of the Nepali artists was actually very famous. Have you heard of the name Arniko? So Arniko was in the 13th century, and he was sent to Tibet by the then king of Nepal. He was like one of the master wood craftsmen. So he was sent to Tibet, and the Tibetan king at that time was so happy with his work that when the Chinese king came to visit him, he sent Arniko to China. So Arniko spent most of his time in China, and the Chinese historians, like, they have written a lot about Arniko, and that's why Arniko is famous, while all the other Nepali wood carvers, we don't know about them. Arniko was also quite a charming character because he had about 13 wives, yeah? Out of which I think only one was Nepali, 3 were Mongolians, 1 was Tibetan, and the rest were Chinese. So he had about 56 children from these 13 women. So even though he himself may not have done erotic art, he was quite a master in erotic art on his own personal life. And today the highway from Nepal to China is called the Arniko Highway, named after this wood craftsman. Yeah? Arniko is that regarded in Nepal even today. Now, one of the things that I was asking them during this was how the craftsmen have evolved over time. Yeah? So they were saying that today most of their money comes from making tourist souvenirs. Yeah? Even though they are master craftsmen, most of their income comes from tourist souvenirs. But after the earthquake, the 2015 earthquake, when most of these temples were destroyed, they started getting a few of these reconstruction projects. Yeah? So they were rebuilding some of these temples by following the pictures from the past. Now that was a big challenge because most of these temples, they had not been photographed in detail. Yeah? People had pictures from far, but they didn't have pictures of each of the columns, each of the pillars, the doors and the windows, which are the most difficult parts to make for the woodcarver. So I also supplied some of the pictures for some of the temples because I was there before the earthquake as well. But one of the shortages that they have now is the number of people who can do this. There are only about 300 such woodcarvers left in Nepal. So there is not enough woodcarvers left to do the carving. So the people I met, they have started a school to encourage women, to encourage lower caste people as well. This is a very caste-driven profession. So woodcarvers are called Shilpakars. They are a particular caste. Tamlakars are people who work with copper. Shilakars are ones who work with stone. So each caste has a different art tradition. Yeah, they are also low caste, but now they are encouraging people from other lower castes to join and learn wood carving. They are encouraging women as well to take up wood carving. But the second problem they have is the lack of wood, yeah, because they don't have enough wood in Nepal, especially after the Maoists have come to power. They have declared many of the forests as protected areas, so they are natural parks. So you cannot cut the trees and just take the wood from there. So there's a big shortage of wood, which is there. Some of the Nepali artists are now practicing with fiber to make some of these pillars and these carvings as well. Yeah. So the earthquake was one of the big factors which had spoiled many of these artifacts, and one of the reasons I wrote this book was to create more awareness so that these carvings can create more interest and people can contribute towards rebuilding of these temples. So as I was saying that these carvings may not have any real purpose other than some of those that I mentioned. But in the modern context, they have been used quite extensively, especially in the debate between the conservative and the liberal aspects of society in Nepal. So when the gay marriage law was being debated in Nepal, they were giving examples of these sculptures that, in the historical times we were much more open, so we should allow such LGBT weddings in our country as well. So they do have a modern day relevance in that context as well. So when I went about looking for these carvings, and I went about in doing more research in them, Before that, I was a non-believer. I have no religion even today. So I was looking at all these artifacts with like a scientist's interest, so as to say, right? But along the process, I had a certain love and certain fascination with the beautiful stories, the kind of imagination people had built around these stories. Just to give you one example of such stories which are associated with these carvings. So there was this god called Indra. Yeah, Indra is like the Zeus of Hinduism. Yeah, he is the king of gods. But he was also not a very nice god. Yeah? He would often go after other people's wives. He would be very cunning. So he's that kind of a god, like Zeus as well. Yeah? And there was this saint who was living in Nepal along one of the rivers, and he had a very beautiful wife. Yeah? So Indra had his eyes on this wife. He always wanted to have sex with this wife. So one day when the saint was, outside begging for money, Indra changed his form into that of this saint. Yeah? So he started looking like this saint. He changed his image, and he went to the wife. So the wife thought it's actually her husband. So they had sex. Yeah? And then he changed his form back to the god. Yeah? So the wife, who is Ahila, was of course very ashamed, and she was very angry as well. So she committed suicide, and she got converted into a stone on the river. Yeah? Today also there is a stone there which people say is that same lady who converted into stone. So when the saint came back, he figured out what has happened, and he was very angry with Indra. So he gave a curse to Indra that your whole body will be covered with 10,000 vaginas. Yeah? So Indra's whole body got covered with 10,000 vaginas. So Indra was of course very shy and ashamed to go out into the open, because now he has vaginas all over his body, right? So then he prayed. He started praying, as in Hinduism there is always a solution for everything. So after praying for about 1,000 years, the Shiva, the god, said, okay, you have prayed enough, I'll convert these 10,000 vaginas into 10,000 eyes. So Indra today is a god with 10,000 eyes. Yeah? So these are the kind of stories that I came across, and it's not so much about the religious aspect of it, but the fantastic imagination which the people have had in creating these stories, which have led me to admire this culture and this kind of treasure of human intellectual achievement. Yeah? So my book in that sense is like a small attempt to talk about these aspects, and hoping for their reconstruction as and when we have enough wood and we have enough wood carvers in Nepal. Okay? So thanks a lot. I hope you had a chance to look at the pictures. So that was about my speech. Any questions, observations, or comments, I'm happy to take. Thank you.
You want to ask something? I have to ask question, just talk.
Well, it really causes me that you work so much because, okay, I thought Taiwanese are very famous for working for long hours, but maybe stereotypically I think Singaporeans are better than us in this. And you said you were in the managerial field, and all these books, I just took a look at them in a very quick way by knowing that these books required of knowing the people, collecting the stories, interviewing them, photographing, and it seems to me like you have a team behind you, as well as some agent who has to represent you to talk with the publishers. And there are also some things that I wanted to share with you, that Mr. Zhang is not just a bookstore owner, the Brilliant Time bookstore. He's also the event organizer, independent publisher, also serves as a very Secretary General in a very important association in Taipei. And he has an excellent team. I was very fortunate to be able to cooperate with the team and to translate 1/3 of the book 3 years ago from an Indonesian writer. And this young lady also published her own book, but she's just a college student. She spent 1 year of her life to make it happen. I just want to know that how do you manage the time while keeping your job regularly to make all this book published, another question is when you write, it is much more likely that you write for yourself, but when you publish, you have a target audience. So who is your target audience? Yeah, that's it.
Thank you for the question. Yeah. So I think if my boss was here, he could answer better whether I work hard or not. Maybe I'm writing when I'm supposed to be working. But for me, I do have an agent who represents me to the publishers. I do work with a lot of friends as well from time to time, with my wife as well. Like when we visit China, she helps me do a lot of the interviews, speaking in Chinese. So my next book will be about Sichuan, the Tibetan part of Sichuan. So she was quite helpful in terms of doing the interviews together with me. But most of the effort has been my own, yeah, in that sense. So the way I look at it is, because I have a day job, I have a certain bit of luxury in terms of speed, in terms of not having to take my work so seriously, not having to take my writing so seriously. So if writing was my only career, I would have to meet all the deadlines. I would have to write a lot of food reviews, hotel reviews, and restaurant reviews to, keep the bread coming. But I don't have that pressure. So I write whenever I feel like there's a strong enough material. Having said that, I'm pretty disciplined about my writing. So every day, whatever happens, I try to write 1 page or 300 words. Yeah. And if I do that over time, in 1 year at least, there are 300 pages, which is good enough for a book. Yeah, so that's how I go about my writing. But again, because I do mostly travel writing and it's centered around travel, so I think I'm first and foremost a traveler rather than a writer. Yeah, so I want to enjoy my traveling and make it as much enriching as I can. And the writing comes second for me. Yeah? If there is sufficient material, only then I'll write. Yeah? So as part of my traveling, I do want to interact with people. I want to talk to the person on the street. I want to talk to the beggar, the homeless, the street cleaner, the policeman, the politician, everyone who I can, just encounter, because that makes the travel a lot more meaningful for me. Because I've seen that I can see Taipei 101, but I could even see the picture on an image and internet. Yeah, but it's the experiences of encounters with people which really makes travel a lot more enriching for me, and leaves the memory far deeper. Yeah, so that's why my style of traveling is to really interact with the people, the common man in the street, and often that gives you enough material to write about. Yeah, and that's my source of inspiration. So most of my writings have been about interactions with people. Even the book about Nepal, it may seem scholarly, but essentially it's a series of dialogues with artists, with sociologists, with Maoists and others. Yeah. So it's essentially that. So again, it's a mix of discipline and a mix of general interest in knowing about the world and being curious about it. And writing sort of comes next to me in that sense. Your second question was regarding publishing.
Publishing. How what's your target audience? How do you make it publish?
Yes, that's an interesting question. I myself don't know who is my target audience. I write for myself a lot.
And what does your publisher say?
Yeah, so what we have seen is that my market is mainly in India. That's where most of my books sell. Also, it sells in US, Germany, and Southeast Asia, because Singapore, Malaysia, and there I do a lot of talks like this. So it sells mostly in Singapore, Malaysia, India, and these places. And usually I get to know, and my publisher also gets to know, who are interested by events like this. So pretty much I would say my target audience is a group like this. Young people, a bit curious, a bit well-traveled, interested in the world, a bit beyond their nationalism, beyond their religion, beyond their language, so a bit more open-minded, I could say. So that's typically my target audience, I would love to think in that sense. Yeah. And that's what happens in these kind of events as well. I get a lot of well-traveled people, young people who come for my talks and who usually buy my book as well. So yeah, I don't know for sure who buys it.
我刚刚好像没有介绍哈，就是我们正在办移民工文学奖，那 Yolanda 就是他太太是我们这一届的评审，那他们就一起过来，所以也有这一场演讲。然后麦克风的那个传法是我们这边的那个一个惯例了，反正每个人都拿那个就一直开着，拿到然后觉得你想讲就讲，不想讲就拿3秒传给下一个，然后说不定他就想讲。就一直传过来，每个人都有发言的权利，要拿至少3秒。
I feel that's like the Olympic torch going around this room.
如果我问的是那个麦克风，可以
可以用中文问，但是我们要回传一次。
对，因为我也是想说，就是Shivaji还有Yolanda都是有正式工作的人，所以我只是很好奇，这个文学奖就是你们在办的时候，就是背后的那个工作团队啊。还有怎么征稿或者是翻译的那些大致的运作情况。
She wants to know more about the operational details since both of us have full-time job. Asking about the organizing team, asking for the marketing for the entries.
还有那个Migrant Library， 就是这个概念都是花时间的。
Migrant Library. It's actually not our initiative. 其实不是我们做的，是他们。
So the way we have run this competition is that we didn't want to have any organization do this. So it's a very anarchic setup. We are not a government organization. We are not any organization. Yeah? So it's just a group of people who come together every year. I just happen to be there every year. Yolanda is also there for the Chinese workers. And then we have a few other workers, migrants workers, as well as refugees and other people who come together to do this every year. The reason we wanted not to have any organization is that whenever you have an organization, it's actually your personal ego which gets reflected in the name of the organization. So in any newspaper, any Facebook post, you always want the name of the organization. Essentially, you want the name of yourself to come, that, oh, this competition is being organized by this and this person or this and this organization. So that's why we didn't want to have any organization created to run this, even though it's much easier to get funding if we were to set up a new organization. Do we need to translate or is it okay? Okay. So the way we outreach to workers, it's always a mix of social media as well as NGOs. Yeah. So most of the migrant workers in Singapore, they do use Facebook very heavily, and so far we have run advertisements, or we have used just by sharing of these posters and these Facebook groups, it has been able to reach a lot of the people. We also sometimes we distribute flyers, like we'll go out into the street and we'll give flyers like to the Burmese workers, but they are not so successful. Facebook and social media has been the most useful way of reaching out to them. In Malaysia, where we work a lot with the refugees, we work through the refugee camps, which are run by the UN, United Nations High Commission. In Kenya, we are running it through the IOM, the International Organization for Migration. So we work with these refugee organizations to reach out to the schools, to the refugee camps, and so on. In terms of actual effort, it's actually not a lot, because once we have all the templates, we don't change the poster, we just change the year 2017 to 2018. Everything else is the same. So we don't change a lot of things. Our sponsors are the same from the last 4 years. We just keep using the same things, and it's fairly templatized in that sense. Yeah? Every year we do the same things, and that's why it doesn't involve a lot of time from our side. And we have contacts with writers, with the venue, we have with the NGOs, so it's just using those contacts to make this happen. It's a much smaller event financially. I think our prize money is very small. In Malaysia, we give only about $100 to the adults. Yeah. Yeah, $100. We give some trophy as well. For the children, we don't give any cash. We just give trophies. Again, we have found out that for a writer, the dollar value doesn't matter so much. It's just the prize and the recognition that they crave for. Yeah. So that's why, and we also don't want to be too dependent on one sponsor. So the US Embassy, they wanted to increase the prize money. They are our main sponsor. But we rejected it because 1 year, like if Trump says that, okay, cancel this competition, then the US Embassy is gone. So that's why we don't want to be too dependent on one by increasing the prize money. Of late, we have had a lot of migrants and refugees doing things on their own. Yeah. And that's where, again, because we are not an organization, this can happen, that migrants, they are free to do their own events. So Migrant Library is one such initiative where the workers have themselves come together and they are running a library. So we just help them with giving some connections if they want, giving them some press contacts to popularize them. On our Facebook, we promote them. That's about it. But what has happened is more and more migrant organizations or migrants themselves have done a lot of these initiatives, and that's our goal as well. Rather than controlling this initiative, let people do whatever they want and give a voice to the migrants in whichever way. So that's how we've been running. Is that an answer? Yeah. You want to add?
我觉得大概都已经回答了他的问题，有可能就是一些细节的东西。那现在有一些除了那个 Migrant Library， 他们还有就是跟我们新加坡的一个剧作家，他们已经就是说自编自导自演几出话剧，然后就是人家问到他们说你们会不会继续，然后其中还有蛮多人说我们会继续这个表演，是也觉得非常的有意义。然后他们每一出话剧大概都要排练半年这样的，但是他们都觉得很有意义，所以到每次很难得的那个周末，他们就会出来，然后带来排演这些。所以我觉得就是说，对于他们来说，这是一扇窗吧。可是对于我们来说，它也只是一扇窗，就是说这扇窗开了以后，那他们走出去会有更多的机会，那是他们自己去创造的。然后新加坡本地也有很多的，好像滨海艺术中心，还有国家剧院等等很多其他的机构，包括一个现代舞的舞蹈艺术家，也以他们的诗歌为主题排演了一出现代舞。所有这些就是说，好像是一个当时我们无心插下了一个柳，最后它的成因是，我觉得是他们自己继续去做的一些事情，他们自己走出来。所以每次有这些节目的时候，我们也觉得很欣慰。I just added the thing about the dance and also the drama they are working on right now. Yeah.
So this year, for the first time, we are organizing a global migrant festival. This will be on the same day as the finals of the migrant poetry competition in Singapore on December 16th. So we will have people from China, from Kenya, from Malaysia, Rohingyas, as well as from Mexico. We are trying. They will have panel discussions. They will do poetry, theater. They will do songs. So for the first time, we are trying to get a global festival going about migration, refugees, irregular and regular migration in Singapore. So this one is taking some time, I must say.
那我想请教Sorry， 那你们这次来参加台湾我们办的移民工文学奖，评审come together。那可是我刚刚听到你们说前面4届就是 repeat 都 一样。那之后会不会有点想改变？那像我们这一次其实是有点改变，我们这一次从前是我们是第5届，之前都是只征台湾的届，那这一次就特别征了港澳新马的届，所以才让我们有机会见到。我不知道这一次你们来台湾的经验会不会，或者说还是你们本来就有准备在第5届、第6届或者未来有一个什么样的 future， 有什么样的愿景？
His question is basically, do we plan to change? Because you were saying that we keep using back the same template, and asking also whether we already plan to change, or after we attend this time their migrant worker literature award, we plan to make some changes. And for them, they have made changes for this round to expand from just Taiwan to basically multiple countries, Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, and Macau. Yeah. So I will say first, to speak in English, I think, so he can hear. From my perspective, I think it was very eye-opening. Especially, I think it's mainly the format. Number one is that you actually lock us up for half a day, so we actually have time to go through. I think that's something I haven't discussed with him, but we can consider, because usually our format is a bit intense. That first of all, everyone submit poetry, and then on the day of the final, the finalists will come together, and they would perform the recitation of the poetry, and the performance plus the work itself will be taken into consideration by the judges. And after all this performance, all the 5 or 6 judges, who are often also poets, or also could be the playwright, they would be ushered into a room, and they are only allowed like 20-30 minutes, and they have to make a decision basically on the spot, and then they come back and announce the results, right? So I feel like what we did that afternoon by sitting together, talking through what are the standards, because it is not just it's not just literature, it's literature for migrants or from migrants, right? So then the question is, which element? Is it the literature value, or the kind of social impact, or kind of how moving the experience is, or something else? What should come first? So I think that discussion that day was really valuable, because we first aligned on what values how we actually look at this whole matter. And for our format, I thought it would have that space for us to discuss. And indeed, all this content and literature come in very different format, right? And with different stories that they are portraying. So I'm thinking that perhaps we can have a balance. That's this one point taken away. The other thing, I guess, we probably will stick to our current format, which is we would still be doing country by country. So because in Malaysia, we had Rohingyas, we had people from Pakistan, right? And then to put them on the same platform with a Singaporean migrant worker, who obviously it won't be fair in a way, because the kind of life experience is very different. So we probably will keep it for a country as for poetry for that. But for other things, I'll discuss with him after this. And really thanks for the experience.
I think I echo the sentiment. For us, we want to keep it small. We want to do this every year, and we don't want to depend on any sponsor organization so much. So it has been a grassroots initiative. We want to keep it like that. Like she said, every country has very different characteristics. In Malaysia, the issue with migrants, refugees, is about exploitation by civilian police. So there are civilian police, they are called Rela, who go around the street looking for illegal or irregular migrants, and they ask for bribes. Yeah? And they are sometimes kept in very bad condition by their agents in very small homes and all that. So that's the main issue. In Singapore, the issue is more of the working condition, the quality of food, the citizenship question for migrants, low-wage migrants. So the issues are different, as she was saying. And but in terms of changing the things that we would like to do, at least I would like to do, is to reach out to a different audience. So like you asked, who are the people who come for my books or who read my books? Similarly, for these migrant events, the audience is very different from the normal Singaporean or normal Malaysian. So hardly you will see Malaysians coming to our events, yeah, in Malaysia. Hardly you will see the middle-age bracket in Singapore who live in the heartlands in that middle-income bracket. They hardly come for our events. It is mostly expats or young graduates who come for our events. So we would like to reach out to a lot to some of these segments from which the bias actually comes. Yeah, so they are the people on the street who have this kind of a bias against migrants and refugees. So it's more about reaching out to them. We have tried organizing these events in a shopping mall. We want to do this in community centers, in open parks. So these are different formats in which we want to do it, to get, so sort of force it onto people rather than people coming into our event. So that is one. We of course have to reach out to a lot more segments like sex workers in Singapore. We haven't been very successful with them. I think last year we had only one entry from a sex worker. So we do want to reach out to sex worker groups in Singapore. In other countries, like there's a lot of migration happening in Australia. They are kept in camps in Nauru and Papua. So there is a case for doing this kind of competition in the refugee camps in Nauru for Australia. In the whole Mexican, the Latin American belt, the kind of exploitation that happens is a lot more than what we see in Malaysia, Singapore, or Taiwan. So there's a case for taking this competition there. And again, because we are not an organization, we don't want to be personally involved. Anyone who wants to take this concept, we can tell them how to do it, and we want to see what outcome it has. The final thing that we would like to change around is to make people take more risks. For example, in Singapore, most of the literature, the migrant literature, they play very safe because they fear that they may be sent back to their country if they write something really against Singapore. Yeah. So I think after we do this a few times, they will have that literary courage to write something. So a lot of workshops are being done. As they become more popular, it will be boosting their confidence as well to write about the real issues. So when we began the competition, all the poems were like crybabies, like, oh, I'm missing home, I'm missing my mother. I mean, I see my mother only once a year. I don't write crying for that, right? So it's a bit artificial. That kind of literature is a bit artificial. So we want slowly the literature to move towards the direction of the real issues that migrants face and let them be the voice for that. So that could be done by more workshops, more awareness about, this is not about your personal popularity, but about a bigger cause. So those are some of the things that I would like to change going forward.
I feel like some of the changes have already happened, seeing that throughout the years. So from crybabies to, I think in maybe the third year, one of the final winners, she was basically writing a poem in the perspective of a domestic helper who was abused. She was abused to weight only 26 kg. So she wrote a poem in that person's perspective, and she was basically blasting out anger on the stage when she was reciting. It was very powerful, but it was in a way very daring. And then as we went to the fourth and fifth, or the most recent competitions, we start to see them basically coming up with their own love stories. They talk about almost anything in the world. They kind of start to shift away from the migrant identity because they kind of, I think in a way they're more comfortable with themselves saying anything in their world without thinking I have to think like a migrant and write like a migrant, but they just write like a human being and sharing a part of their world with us. And I personally really like that change.
Okay. Now we have the second turn. Everyone. No, wait. You have to say something about why you be here today. In Chinese or in English?
I came here because I saw this information on Facebook, and I'm really curious about how to say it.
In Chinese, in Mandarin it's okay.
就是 I'm curious about this topic.
哪一个 topic 是这一本书还是哪一本书？
就是他在 Facebook 上面有一个名称，然后我蛮想知道是他到底在说些什么。But unfortunately my English is not very well, so I cannot really understand some of the speaker said. So that's really a pity for me.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. As a quick question, do you plan to go to other places to visit and write in the book, and what's the many culture do you want to visit for the next book? Yes.
So one of the things which is in the works with publishers and agent is the book about the Tibetan part of Sichuan that I mentioned. Then actually I'm writing for the first time about my home. Yeah, so I was born in the northeastern part of India. So last year we spent quite some time back in the northeastern part of India, and if you know the northeastern part of India, it's one of the most diverse. There are more than 800 languages. There are people from Cambodia, from China, from Thailand, who came there about 500 years ago, 800 years ago, 1,000 years ago, just 100 years ago. So all these people, they speak these different languages and they all hate each other. Yeah. So they have been killing each other for the last 1,000 years. Yeah. And even today you can see there's a lot of conflict. Everyone is asking for independence. Yeah. So the Nagas in India are asking for independence from India. Within Nagas, there are 14 tribes, each of them are asking for freedom from their Nagaland. So it's a very complicated place, but it's also a very intimate place because I speak the language in many of these places. And when we went there, the people really welcomed their doors and they were very warm to us. People are known to be very warm and gentle, but when these conflicts happen, they can kill 3,000, 5,000 people as recently as just 10 years back. Yeah. So I'm writing about that place, which naturally gives a lot of material to me because of these different cultures which are there, the different histories and sad histories which are there. And at the same time, it's about my home, yeah, the place where I grew up as a child. So there's a lot of internal reflection as well as the historical, political, and that context. So that's the next place that I'm writing about. I don't know what my next book is going to be after this, yeah, because as I was saying, I'm first and foremost a traveler and then a writer. So if there is something which interests me and comes along the way and I think rest of the world doesn't know much about them, like northeast of India, then I might write about that. Yeah. So that's how I approach writing. I don't take it so seriously at this point.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to ask some question about this book and that one. I saw many stories of many countries of this book, and I'm curious, how long did you spend on this book? I think it's impossible to do this in 1 year or 2 years, so how long did you spend on this, and what's the idea to you to do this book? Maybe I think maybe you your habit is you like to write some articles, but to publish a book is another thing. So I would like to know what's the idea, and also for the other book of Nepal, I think that topic is very special one for all of us. So what's the idea for publish that book, and also for these two books, what's the biggest challenge for you to publish them? Thank you.
Thank you. So for this book, you are right. It took me about 6 years to write this book. I was not working on this only at the time. I was working on other things as well. Usually I don't write these short stories. I usually write just a long piece, like the book on Nepal. My first book was about Indonesia, about 2 islands in Indonesia, and the whole book was about Indonesia, those 2 islands. So these were small articles based on smaller trips that I had taken over the last 6 years, and I felt that I had a big enough collection. So I had about 33 stories here, I think. So that was a big enough collection, and there was something common among all these stories. And as I was saying before, these are stories about interactions with the common people, people who you don't usually interact as a tourist. Like homeless people, I don't think tourists usually go and interact with them. So these are stories about such interactions, and I call them more of non-required travel. Yeah, so that's the theme that I've been centering around these stories about meeting people who you usually don't interact with, but they at the same time could have very interesting stories about their own life, and I want to share that aspect of human lives with my readers. Yeah, so that's the intent. For the other book, The Sacred Love, it was out of general curiosity, because as I was saying, when I saw these carvings, I was interested and I wanted to know more about them. And there were very few books written about these sexual art in Nepal. There were, I think, only about 4 books written about them. One is a scholarly book, which is out of print now. And the other 3 are more like tourist books. Yeah, they are very small, colorful books. And the scholarly book, it was too scholarly. It was treating sex like a mechanical engineering problem. Yeah, so that was how it was written. And all the other touristy books were treating these carvings as like pornography. Yeah, they were making a very different meaning out of these carvings. So that's where I thought there is a reason enough and space enough for a book like mine, which is not too scholarly. At the same time, it doesn't dismiss this work as pornography. Yeah, so that's why I wanted to write about this book. At the same time, the earthquake happened, and many of these temples were destroyed. And I thought that my book, if it is read by a few people, they may have some interest in helping towards regenerating these temples. And luckily this book has been received well in Nepal. The reviews have been good, and that's a scary thing for me usually, to see reviews from the home country talk about something which I don't know as much as them. So far that has been good. So that's why these books I wrote about. Again, I don't usually go with a idea in mind first and then visit that place. I visit a place first, then some ideas come, and then I write about that. Yeah. So that was about the book. I again forgot your second question. I always forget the second question. Oh, the challenges, yeah. So for the Nepal book, the biggest challenge was that there is so little written about this book. So a lot of this is oral history, and a lot of this are myths and superstitions rather than actual history. So I had to understand them by talking directly to the people, like the priests, the anthropologists, the sociologists. There was no reference books I could read to understand them. So that was a big challenge for me, and that's why I was scared when the reviews came out. Like, have I made some mistake? Have I missed out something? Fortunately, it seems I haven't missed out, at least what other reviewers have figured out. So that was the big challenge here. When it comes to the other book, The Angels by the Murky River, usually I think the big challenges in writing these kind of travel books for me is, number one, the language, because they are spread across 16 countries, from Spanish-speaking Ecuador to Portuguese-speaking Brazil to China to Indonesia. So language is a big challenge. I do speak quite a few languages. I speak Indonesian fairly okay. I speak a little bit of Chinese, a little bit of Spanish and French, Russian, but they can never give me like 100% understanding of what is happening. So language is a challenge, and especially there are interactions with the people. So language is the main challenge. So maybe I was not able to go as deep in some cases as I would have liked to if I could speak the language as fluently as them. So I think that was the main issue for them. And of course, I was working on these articles when I was also working on my day job. So that limits the amount of time I could spend with some of these people. Like the Filipino women boxers, I would have loved to spend 1 year with them if possible, but I could spend only a few days. So these are the challenges I had in writing this book.
Thank you. 还是我传那么快？我们不是问题，要讲自己。没关系，你拿着麦克风你就先讲。
Just a question. 就是移民工文学奖，就是什么样的契机让你们想要做这件事情？然后因为我看他的旅游的经历是比较在东南亚，那为什么会让他就是这么就是喜欢在东南亚旅行？有什么原因吗？
So
Two questions from her. The first one is what triggered you to start the migrant worker competition. Then the second one is it seems like you like to travel in Southeast Asia. What's the reason?
I'll answer the second question first because I always forget the second question. So I travel a lot within Southeast Asia because it's the cheapest to fly from Singapore. that's the easy answer. But yeah, I mean that is one factor as well. But also I think Southeast Asia countries like Indonesia and Philippines, which I've written a lot more about. It has been easy for me to communicate with them because of languages I'm more comfortable with, and at the same time they are very diverse countries as well. Indonesia, same like Northeast India, they have more than 800 languages, as many tribes and as many different cultures. Same thing for Philippines as well. There's a lot of human stories there, and that interests me as a person. This complexity of human life which is there in Southeast Asia. Otherwise, in places like Singapore or Europe, a lot of the things may seem homogeneous in that sense. One of the things I also found in Southeast Asia, not just Southeast Asia but China and India as well, is that the human relationships are not yet transactional. Yeah? So in Europe, for instance, I find it very difficult to appreciate things other than beautiful buildings or parks, because it's very hard to have a candid conversation with a local, and the only conversations which are possible, it seems, are with the receptionist, with the cash counter, or with the tour guide, yeah, who are the most unreliable people in the world. So that is the problem I have in Europe. Yeah. But over time I have had a chance to go to Africa quite a bit, to Latin America as well, and I think my next few books, if I write a collection like this, there will be stories from Africa. So like in Botswana, I did a short story about the fireside churches. They call them the fireside churches, which are just churches which are set up in a tent suddenly. Yeah, so it's just a small tent they will build to set up a church, and they hope that over time they can collect enough donation to buy a Mercedes for the priest as well as a big building for the church. So I did a story on these churches which come up and how they interact with children. I have some stories about the slums in Kenya, which I could write about later. So yeah, I think going forward there will be stories from other parts of the world as well, if I manage to write them and the publishers still have some faith in me. The other question that you asked was why I started the Migrant Worker Poetry Competition. So I've been working with migrants for a few years before that as well. I myself, and I'll talk about this tomorrow during the panel discussion, is that I myself have been a migrant, and I have been a minority all my life. Yeah, so when I was born in Northeast India, I was a minority as a Bengali speaker. Wherever in the world I've been, I've always been a minority, and migrants are a minority in most places. And I also found that migrants have a strong casteist feeling among themselves. So there are the migrants like me who are, have a better income in some sense, and then there are the migrants who work as daily wages, or they get much lower pay, and they have to stay in a certain kind of housing, they have to eat a certain kind of food, and they can never become a citizen, and it's much harder for them to leave a place. Yeah. And so that's what fascinated me, that why this kind of divide between migrants themselves. And I found that when I was working with the migrants, as we ran a soup kitchen in Singapore for migrant workers who had work injury issues. The companies were disputing their work injuries, so they were not paying them salary. So we ran a soup kitchen. There's an organization there. So when I was working there, I found, because I could talk their language, Bengali, a lot of the migrants would talk about their poems, the kind of things they love to write. And then I thought that many Singaporeans don't know about this aspect of their lives. And instead of running a charity for migrants, which gives things to migrants, it is probably better for migrants to speak out themselves about what they feel. So give a platform to the migrants themselves, rather than just giving them old clothes or food and all these things. So that was my idea. And in general, like in any social movement, usually culture has a big part to play. So for example, in communist movements, you always had a big focus on culture. Yeah? So any social movement, culture is an important part of it. It may not play a direct role, but an indirect role in changing perceptions, making change happen. So I thought there was a gap in that aspect when talking about migrants and refugees in this part of the world. And that's why I started this particular event. And so far, I must say, though the response has been quite favorable from international media and the local Singaporean writers, what keeps us going every year is the kind of interest and excitement the migrants, the refugees themselves bring in. So they really look forward to this competition, and they really give their 100% when they are on the stage on their delivery. And that's a very powerful moment for me personally, to keep doing this every year rather than just let them take care of it themselves.
Actually, I have.
你开着等2秒就。
上面，
推上去要等一下。
就大声说就好。
有了，现在有。
Actually, I have no questions so far. I just come here to let you bring opinion from other countries, and thank you for your sharing some kind of experience. And I've been to Nepal and India for twice, just for English practice. I think it's an amazing place. Yeah, thank you.
好，没关系，不强迫。
I come here just because she come from Thailand and live in my home, so I have to take her back. And I have a simple question. It's about Shivaji and Yolanda live in Taipei for these days. What do you think about Nanshijiao or Taipei?
Okay. You're right to answer first.
Oh, you can compare the Taipei and Singapore.
I wish I can stay here more to try all the food. So far, I think I only ticked a few boxes, but I really would love to have more. I tried, what did I try? 那个鸭血臭豆腐，卤肉饭。
这个在新加坡都没有吗？
都没有哎，我在任何我们在那个松山那边，我在任何夜市走了一圈，我就觉得所有的吃新加坡都是没有的。 就是很夸张，不过就是新加坡的食物来这边也是没有啦。然后所以我觉得时间不够啊，就是每一餐都吃新的都不大够用。另外一个就是觉得台湾人真的超好，就是在不管是就好像Shivaji说会跟各种各样的人，就是有一些很简单的接触的话，都会感觉到就是那种耐心和那种爱心。我觉得在其他的国家我还很少感觉到，就是可能是路上随便一个什么人，他都会去。就是好像比如说在小摊贩跟他买东西，他都会跟你说哦，小心是会烧会烫哦，就觉得很温暖这样。然后我还是换回英文吧。I was just saying I love the food and I love the people. And the other thing is I feel like Taiwan is a bit of a kind of a slow-paced place. Comparing to like I can feel like in Hong Kong in the streets everyone would be rushing you, but in Singapore people also walk much faster. Like in Taiwan people are kind of pacing a bit, which sometimes I feel on one hand is nice, on the other hand I feel a bit like is it also a sign of the economy, because in a place where economy is growing very fast and things would be much more cutthroat and people would be in a rush, right? So I would definitely love to see more good news about Taiwan's economy, and which might mean, at the cost of our, cozy little slow pace as well. Yeah, that is my very little, few impressions so far. I've only been here for 3 days, and yet that thanks to Zhang Zheng 老师 brought us here.
So yeah, I got some few minutes to think about what to say without making you all angry. So for me, I think going to any place, I find it very hard to say Taiwan is like this or Taipei is like this. I think it would be unfair to say Taiwanese are like this just based on my few days of interaction. So I'm more interested in individual characters, and that's what I usually write about as well. Individuals rather than Indonesians or Filipinos. I write about individuals. Yeah. So for me, so far, a very interesting character or group of characters have been our morning breakfast place. Taiwanese are nice, she said, but we are very scared of this breakfast place because you have to. Yeah. So usually she's the one who speaks, but she gets scolded every time she makes a mistake. So we have to prepare in advance, like I want this, I want to eat here, and I want to have this warm and this one cold. Yeah. So if you make any mistake or you stop for a second, like, oh, I may be, then you will get scolded, like, move ahead, we have people, right? So these 3 people who are from the same family and 3 generations, like the grandmother, the mother, and the son. Yeah, so I think they have been very interesting characters for me in Taipei so far, and I'll remember them more than any one of you, I guess. But so that's one. The second thing is, I have heard a lot about Taipei as Taiwan as such as being one of the more open places in Asia, definitely. Yeah. So when it comes to, let's say, LGBT rights, or when it comes to accepting transgenders, like Taiwan has a transgender minister. So I'm looking forward to that, experiencing that. And in the streets and all, I can see that people who are different are far more comfortable walking around or sitting around than they are in India or China or even Singapore, yeah, so which is a lot more conservative society. So these are some memories I'll take back, and I have only 2 days here more, and maybe Sunday I hope to go to Taipei main station. We hope to go to Taipei main station and observe all these madness that is there in Taiwan. So I hope I can interview some Falun Gong people, I can interview some... Yeah. So yeah, that's my next goal on Sunday, to see all these political campaigns happening around.
Actually, if you have any suggestions, please let us know.
礼拜天你们就回去了吧？
礼拜天中午走了。
法轮功明天那个中正纪念堂前面就会有啊，法轮功到处都满是。You can interview 法轮功 everywhere. 西门町 or 湾。
A leader or only two of them?
I want to interview the leader. 不是访问坐在地上。好。Please.
Okay, I have a last question. I'm not going to ask private question if you don't want to answer, it's fine. And you two come from two countries and two cultures, and I just curious and want to know what do you think about two cultures? The marriage of two cultures.
Yeah.
From my perspective, it's kind of easier because of the expectations are lower. I feel like I'm not expected to perform what an Indian wife would need to do because I'm not Indian. And similarly, I escape from what a Chinese mother-in-law would have expected me to do because I don't have a Chinese mother-in-law. So all my Indian girlfriends, when they heard that I have Indian husband, they're like, oh my god, Indian mother-in-laws are scary. But I was like, that's fine because they don't expect me of the same. So I would say that my mother is also not having the same expectation of her son-in-law just because he can't even understand her. so that kind of makes things easier. But I would say actually it's a very individual experience as well. It depends on the family, and I think so far his family is really very understanding. And my family also, they don't have, any expectation other than two of us being happy together. I do have also friends, for example, from India, and some of you may know in India, the Hindus and the Muslims, they have a history of killing each other and a lot of conflict till today. So I had friends who marry across these two communities, and they are really facing a lot of issues from both sides of the family because religion is also in the way. So general observation is when there's Muslim family involved from one party is usually kind of more difficult, right? And I guess religion can be in a way. And then they usually, like the couple I know, they move to Singapore because I think Singapore is also a rather international place. They are more open to interracial. And sometimes we walk in the street and we feel pretty upset, like, hey, so many interracials roaming around, we are no longer special, So, so that is my feeling right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a very individual experience. Yeah, I mean, there are 1 billion Indians and 1 billion Chinese, and I think all of them have very different personalities, and it's your fortune or misfortune to have come against the bad times or the good times. So in a way, I think both of us, because we have lived abroad so many times, I don't consider myself a very good representative of Indianness in many ways, but I'm also a very good representative of Indianness in many ways. So, these are aspects. For example, I don't have a religion, and that could be a big part of lives among Indians, and that could take up her time in doing a lot of these wife's duties in terms of going to the temples, doing rituals, having to suffer many of the biases against women in Hinduism, which is there. So she doesn't have to bear with that, maybe because I'm very strongly anti-religious. At the same time, I have a lot of Indian things in myself. For example, my food habits are becoming more and more Indian for some reason or the other. So, many Chinese people, they are scared of curry, and her mother-in-law, my mother-in-law, her mother has to get that shock whenever they come here to see that curry in there. So these kind of mix and mashes are there. She's also, I don't think, a very good representative of traditional Chinese culture in that sense. So it's been easier that way, that most of us, our very defining edges have been taken away by being outside for so many years. But there's also a core in us, I think, which is still very Chinese and still very Indian. So for example, if I make fun of Chinese things, for example, the Chinese habit of drinking hot water, even if it's 45 degrees Celsius outside, she will try to fight back, even though she's not a Chinese nationalism person. Similarly, if she criticizes something about the sweets from my community, our community sweets are UNESCO heritage. So if she criticizes that because of being high calorie and more diabetic, I will fight back. Like, this is our heritage and this is what we have developed over 3,000 years. It doesn't compare with your red bean paste or something. This is something much more sophisticated. Then I will fight back with these insults. So even though we are very dilute in terms of our identities, there is still a core of us which will fight back if that is insulted, which I find a bit interesting. But also we found there's a lot of similarities in our cultures as well, especially in the conservative side of our culture. I think the way the rituals are designed and the way they are supposed to be followed in terms of inheritance, in terms of attitudes towards the male members of the family and the female members, there's a lot of similarities in between the two cultures, which we don't have to bear with, but that's an interesting similarity for us as well. But again, there are the great sides of things, there are the funny sides of things as well. For example, I think when we went to visit one of our relatives in Northeast China, and she was trying to show off that I can speak some Chinese. At that time, I could speak only a little bit of Chinese. She asked me to say some words of Chinese. And somehow the first phrase that came into my mind was 小姐多少钱? Because in Singapore, it's a very common thing to say. It's like, how much is the water or how much is the food? It's a very common thing to say, so I know that. But in China, it's not a very nice thing to say, especially if you are meeting your would-be wife's relatives for the first time. So there are these funny moments as well, which happens. There's some misunderstandings which happen sometimes, but also there are a lot of misunderstandings which are avoided. For example, so my parents, they don't understand English very well, and her mother doesn't understand English very well, so they have to translate first to her and then to me. So a lot of these cultural conflicts between the in-laws we can manage, because we don't translate the bad things, we only translate the good things. So it's sometimes easier to manage than in the same cultural relationship in that sense.
Thanks for your interesting question, and thanks for you to answer. And this part, tomorrow we will not listen this part in tomorrow's conference. 明天下午它是4点，对不对？明天下午在那个台湾博物馆的南门园区4点还有一场。Shivaji会和一位在香港在香港教书的台湾学者有一场英文对谈，那是4点。那往前推呢，2点的时候呢 ，Yolanda 会和台湾的蓝佩佳老师，还有和香港的作家苏美智，他们会有一场中文的对谈，他们都会谈那个移工女性的后台，那是明天下午2点的时候，2点是他会再谈一次，4点是那个Shivaji会再谈一次。那其实我们明天的活动早上10点半就开始，早上10点半会有一场陈冠中和侯继然导演的一场对谈。那谈作品和它背后的意义，两个都男生，那一个是导演，一个是，陈冠中什么都做了，陈冠中一个年纪比较大，他的这个历程比较长，他也是作家，也做杂志，也做那个电视。 明天下午1点半，也在同一个场地，台湾博物馆的南门园区，我们会有一个记者会，会公布这一届的移民工文学奖的作品。那到时候我们这一届的评审也都会在现场。如果大家有空的话，虽然是现在已经报名已经满了啦，不过其实我觉得，因为也不用先缴钱，所以报名的会不会去我也不知道。那个场地其实还蛮大的，他是说是古迹，所以只能进去100个人，可是也没有人会算吧，我想。就如果有兴趣的话，欢迎来听听看，明天一整天的谈文学、谈移民的一整天的座谈。好，那 today thanks everyone come here。那时间到了，我们就下课吧，谢谢。
你的书都在这边吗？就是这一届只有这两个。